The stream of families never stops, climbing towards Syria's most notorious صيدنايا prison, pushed on by reports that thousands of people imprisoned by the regime of Bashar al-Assad are still trapped alive in a section underground.
السجن الأحمر عم بيحاولوا 3 أيام يوصلوا له ما في أكسجين تبع التهوية ما عم تشتغل يعني إذا ما طلعوا بآخر وقت ممكن كلهم يموتوا تحت السجن الأحمر مشان الله مشان الله مشان الله ساعدوهم كرمال الله لا تنسوا.
في هذا من عائلتك بالسجن هلا يعني؟ مين يعني؟
إخواتي ثلاث إخوة 3 إخوة جوز بنتي.
The roads are choked with cars full of people looking for loved ones. As soon as they see our camera, they approach, holding lists of names of those who vanished inside Assad's dungeons, never to be seen again.
Everybody's just started running. It's not clear if they have managed to get into this part of the prison.
My God, the woman prays, my God, as the crowd surges towards the prison.
So it looks like they think that they have managed to get access. A lot of celebratory gunfire, people now just flooding in.
After the initial jubilation, an agonizing wait for confirmation from the rescue workers. Many here have been waiting for decades. Hope was something they didn't let themselves feel until now. Rescue workers with Syria's white helmets break through the concrete looking for a way in. No one is certain where this red section is, or if it even exists. Inside the prison, family members are searching too.
You can see people everywhere just combing through all the papers and records they can find, looking for names, seeing if maybe their loved ones are there.
Tens of thousands of Syrians were forcibly disappeared in صيدنايا, lost in the abyss of a prison that was known as a slaughterhouse. Industrial-scale arbitrary detention and torture, all to keep one man in power.
They call this the white area of the prison because they say the conditions here are much better than in other areas, but you can see it's still miserable.
In the center of the prison, another frantic rush. Someone thinks they have found a tunnel. They desperately try to get a look inside. Others look on, helpless. Not knowing is agony. Assad may be gone, but the legacy of his cruelty remains.
There are still conflicting reports about صيدنايا and whether this so-called red section of the prison exists. A group that calls itself the Association of Detainees and the Missing in صيدنايا put out a statement on Twitter saying that basically this was incorrect, that all people who were being held in صيدنايا had been released by 11 a.m. on December 8th, and yet we are still seeing media reports as recently as an hour ago saying they believe once again they may have found this so-called red area. And all of this, I think, Jake, really speaking to the general state of confusion that exists on the ground here on the streets of Damascus tonight. It is very quiet, eerily calm, but definitely today we saw long lines of people waiting for gas, waiting to take out cash, waiting for bread, trying to stock up on groceries as people grapple with the enormity of this moment and what the future may hold. Jake.
All right, Clarissa Ward in Damascus, Syria. Thank you so much. Please stay safe. Let's talk about all this with Ibrahim Al-Asil. He's a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute, and Natasha Hall, a senior fellow with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Ibrahim, I'll start with you. The rebel group HTS appears to be taking control of some important parts of Syria, but is that group truly in charge, or is there still enough of a power vacuum for something to change? What's the status of how this country is being run?
Thanks for having me, Jake. This is a great question to start the discussion with, because if we look at what happened over the last 13 years, we see that the Syrian state was collapsing throughout Syria. And in the major part of the country where Assad survived for 13 years, his regime survived but the state collapsed. So many local communities took things into their own hands, and they formed some sort of coordination bodies where they can run their towns or their neighborhoods or other parts of Syria. But that wasn't the case really inside the city of Damascus. That's why now security is kind of a concern in the city to see if actually the rebel groups will be able to offer security the same way they were able in Aleppo. In Aleppo, the city was controlled only by one armed group, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS. In Damascus, the situation was different, but gradually, over the last 2 to 3 days, HTS has been trying to assert control over the city. They've been trying now to protect the public buildings after they were looted, and they are offering some vision of power transition that's still very ambiguous, and Syrians can't really tell what's going on.
Natasha, the leader of HTS, in public statements he seems to be trying to strike a moderate tone, at least relatively. He's claiming that he's opposed to the brutal tactics used by other jihadi groups. Today, they issued general amnesty for soldiers in the Syrian military who had been conscripted, forced into service. What do you make of that movement, and how long do you think this appearance of moderation can last?
Thank you so much for having me, Jake. It's a great question, and I think a lot remains to be seen. But what we do know is that Jilani is doing and saying the right things. Immediately upon entering Aleppo city, they tried to prevent looting, protect government buildings, as Ibrahim mentioned. They also went around to reassure not just minorities, Christians and others, but also those who were living in regime-controlled areas in the western part of the city for the entirety of the conflict, that no harm would come to them. And most recently, we've seen another statement from HTS basically saying that no members should interfere with a woman's attire, essentially. So we can see that there is a protection of minorities and hopefully protection of livelihoods as well. Now, I do know that there is a search for certain kinds of regime officials in parts of the coast, in Latakia and in Damascus, and we hope that comes to sort of a peaceful accountability effort, but there is still the potential for a lot of tensions. And it's also not clear if HTS will be able to really control the rising emotions amongst the population that has suffered brutally under this regime for not just 13 years, but really over half a century.
And Ibrahim, back to the search for all those missing Syrians and others in that horrific prison. You've noted that the prison design and the absence of blueprints make the search more difficult. What are you hearing? Is there any hope that more people will be found there and they'll be alive?
You know, that's a very difficult question for many of the families and the mothers around those prisons, trying to at least to find the closure. I think the next step will be looking for the mass graves around those prisons. But, you know, when I look at what's happening in those prisons, when I look at them trying to find detainees through the cracks in the walls, and they dig in the floors trying to bring them up, for me, that's Syrians looking in the eyes of Assad Syria, trying to find any survivors, trying to look into those dark dungeons. And when I saw the rebels, that many of them, they wanted to reach those prisons before they wanted to reach the presidential palace itself in Damascus, that tells a lot about the core of this uprising, of why people picked up arms and they said, no matter what happens to me, I would kill or get killed, but I'm not going back to those prisons again. This is at the core of the Syrian uprising. And these detention centers that were designed to rule the Syrian society through fear are very symbolic to how Assad Syria was. And now this fight to find survivors is also symbolic as well.
All right. Thanks to both of you.